The Las Vegas Raiders select.
All right, Mike Tannenbaum here, ESPN analyst, former Jets general manager and Miami Dolphins executive vice president of football operations. Few people know what draft week is like you, Mike. How stressful but also awesome is the week coming up to us?
Great to be with you, Nick. You know, there's a lot of excitement. It's an organizational pick when you think about security and medical, the area scout, the coaches, team psychologists. There's so much information and work that goes into it. When you turn in the card, you feel like, boy, hey, everyone had a big, hand in this.
Well, here in Las Vegas, Raider Nation is definitely wondering what they're going to be doing at 6th overall in Pete Carroll's first draft as Raiders head coach. You know, they got the quarterback situation solved seemingly with Geno Smith. But when you think about what the Raiders can do at number 6, what goes through your head?
Ashton Jeanty, you look at how they've stabilized the franchise. Pete Carroll, very well-established veteran coach. As you mentioned, Geno Smith. And you think about the success that Coach Carroll had in Seattle for all those years with Beast Mode, Marshawn Lynch. You look at Ashton Jeanty, he had over 1,700 yards after contact. Stylistically, he's a perfect fit for Chip Kelly, the new offensive coordinator. Pete Carroll, I'd be surprised if they didn't pick Jeanty. I think he's a tone setting, much the way we saw Joe Alt, the first pick of the Jim Harbaugh era last year with the Chargers. I think Ashton Jeanty is an ideal fit for the Raiders.
Yeah, Pete Carroll definitely has a history of running the rock, and new GM John Spytek has that winning history with Tom Brady in Tampa. Now, it is considered a very deep running back class in this year's draft, Mike. As a GM, how do you weigh that, knowing that you may have solid options to be your starting running back down the line, and you might actually, even if you do love Jeanty, you might want to go ahead and go for a different position at 6?
It's a great question because there are so many great running backs. Just knowing he's an ideal fit, he's a good pass protector, he can catch the ball. And certainly they could go other positions, maybe offensive tackle, certainly receiver amongst others. I just think Jeanty is an ideal fit, and it would be hard to pass that up.
Well, before March, many Raider fans thought that this draft would be the one where they take their quarterback of the future, but then the Raiders traded for Geno Smith. Now, maybe they still take a quarterback in the middle rounds, but do you think that quarterback is off the table at the first round pick, and why?
I do. Not only did they give up a third-round pick, but they just signed him to a 3-year extension. So I do think they could take a quarterback in the middle rounds, maybe someone like a Riley Leonard from Notre Dame, for example. But just given the constraint system of the NFL salary cap and all the other holes that most teams have to fill, including the Raiders, I would just be surprised if they double down the first round, given the recent extension of Geno Smith.
Well, we all know the names in this draft that make the headlines, the Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Ashton Jeantys, these playmakers, but it's also considered a very deep class of defensive linemen as well. And John Spytek in his history loves to draft offensive linemen. So if the Raiders do decide to pass on Jeanty at 6, or he doesn't make it to 6, what big boys do you think Pete Carroll could be looking at adding to his lines?
Armand Numbo, offensive tackle from Missouri, Will Campbell, tackle from LSU, other side of the ball. You can't go wrong with either Jalen Walker, Michael Williams, 2 guys from Georgia, amongst many others. There's a ton of pass rushers like Mike Green from Marshall. They'll get a really good player where they are. Again, I'm thinking running back, but if they go up front, they got tons and tons of choices.
Now, Mike, last time I talked to you was before last year's draft. Antonio Pierce was the coach, Tom Telesco is the GM, and it was not the season the Raiders hoped for. But when you look big picture at this organization and where they stand, getting a lot of injured pieces back in the fold, and now with a Super Bowl winning coach with Pete Carroll at the helm, do you think the Raiders are ready to compete, or do you think they should be drafting for the future?
I think they've really stabilized the franchise, most notably at GM, quarterback, and head coach. And, I think they're going to try to find different ways to win. They're competing against Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert and Bo Nix. That's why I think every time Ashton Jeanty runs the ball, it's one less time that Patrick Mahomes can throw it. And I think that's the way Pete Carroll has won a lot of games. So, again, that's why I think that running back really fits their philosophy. But I think they've really gone a step in the right direction. I'm also a big fan of Chip Kelly. I think he's done a really good job for a long time.
Well, unless the Raiders shock us all and pull a page out of the Falcons playbook on day one, it's not going to be a quarterback 6th overall. But that's going to be a huge question going into day 2 if we see the potential Geno Smith successor being taken for Las Vegas. You mentioned Riley Leonard. What do Raider fans need to know about these middle round quarterbacks? And is there a one that maybe you see as a particular fit with what Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll like to do?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly talk about him or Will Howard, who played for Chip Kelly at Ohio State. Big, physical, good athlete. Riley Leonard from Mobile, Alabama, originally a quarterback, went to Duke. Also a very good athlete, something that, Chip Kelly likes in his quarterbacks.
Well, one big piece of news that happened last season, Mike, was superstar wide receiver Devontae Adams being shipped out for the pick that was used to get Geno Smith from Seattle. That does leave a hole at wide receiver. You do have Ted McMillan in this class, Matthew Golden. What do you think about this wide receiver class and maybe how the Raiders can address it? Maybe not on day 1, but potentially in the middle rounds.
Yeah, tons and tons of good receivers. So, we'll see what direction. I think guys like Matthew Golden, certainly, T. McMillan will probably, not be there once we get to the top of the second round. Look, you never know this day and age. But there's really good depth. There's some really good tight ends. One, they don't need one, obviously, with Brock Bowers. But they come in all different shapes, sizes. Jack Besh, another name from TCU that I think will be more of a second round pick. I think he could be in the mix for the Raiders.
Let's just say Ashton Genty is not taken by the Raiders, right? And they head into day 2, and they still have just Zamir White leading their backfield after being the worst rushing attack in the NFL last season. What running backs do you think could be there in rounds 2 and round 3 that could become Pete Carroll's new workhorse?
Well, stay on the Ohio State theory here. Travion Henderson, Quinshawn Judkins, 2 guys that Coach Kelly had. I think they'll probably both be second round picks. There's so many. Ollie Gordon, Cam Scatteraboo. There's an embarrassment of riches at running back.
Finally, defensive back has become a huge hole for the Raiders over the offseason, losing guys like Nate Hobbs, Trayvon Merrick. I mean, it was an offseason of a lot of turnover for that defense. What do you make of these cornerbacks in this draft class and how it can translate to helping the Raiders after this draft?
Yeah, outside of Travis Hunter, I think there's still some really good ones. Jahdae Barron, Will Johnson from Michigan. A guy I like in particular is a guy named Shavon Ravel from East Carolina, very long, athletic corner who got hurt last year. But I think in a year he has a chance to be a frontline corner. So there's pretty good depth at corner this year as well.
You're going to be seeing a lot of Mike Tannenbaum on Get Up on ESPN and plenty of shows. Mike, we hope you have a great draft week, and thanks so much for the time.
Thank you.